Right now, everything around you is decaying. The wooden desk you're sitting at, the food in your fridge, the book on your shelf. Given 1,000 years, none of it would exist. Given 10,000, not even the metal would survive. Your own body is built from fragile organic molecules that begin breaking down the moment your heart stops. Within a century, your bones will have surrendered their collagen. Within a few hundred years, your DNA will have shattered into chemical noise. That's the rule. Organic material does not survive deep time. It never has, it never should. But somewhere in a Spanish cave, a body has held its genetic information for 430,000 years. That's older than our species. That's older than every language, every culture, every empire. And it's still readable. Somewhere in a Danish bog, a man's face looks like he died last Tuesday, when in reality, he was killed before the Roman Empire existed. Somewhere in a freezer in Italy, a 5,000-year-old murder victim still carries the blood of the man who killed him. None of these bodies should exist. And yet here they are, telling us who we were. I want to take you to 3 places on Earth where the rules of decay stopped working. 3 ancient human bodies that DNA says should have disappeared into dust thousands of years ago, but somehow, impossibly, did not. And once you understand how they survived, you'll never look at your own mortality the same way again. Let's start in the mountains. The Ötztal Alps, specifically. September 19, 1991. 2 German hikers, Helmut and Erika Sima, are crossing a high glacial pass near the border of Austria and Italy. The summer had been unusually hot. The glaciers had been retreating, exposing ice that hadn't seen sunlight in millennia. And as they walked, they saw something dark protruding from the melting ice. At first they thought it was a discarded doll. Or maybe a mountaineer who had died recently, someone whose body the glacier had claimed just a few years earlier. They reported it to the authorities, who showed up with pneumatic drills, thinking they were recovering a modern accident victim. But the body they pulled from that ice was not recent. It was not even close. The man had died 5,300 years ago, and the glacier had kept him so perfectly preserved that his stomach still contained his last meal. His skin still showed the tattoos on his joints. His copper axe, the oldest complete example ever found, still rested beside him. They named him Ötzi, after the mountains where he was found. And what scientists have since extracted from his body has rewritten everything we thought we knew about prehistoric Europe. Think about what 5,300 years means for a moment. When Otzi died, the pyramids of Giza had not yet been built. Stonehenge did not exist. The wheel had only recently been invented in Mesopotamia. Writing itself was still centuries away. Every empire you can name, every civilization you learned about in school, every language you speak, none of it existed yet. And this man's body is still intact enough that we can sequence his entire genome, read the contents of his stomach, and reconstruct the final hours of his life with terrifying precision. So what happened to him, and why, against every law of chemistry, did his DNA survive? The story written in his body is brutal. Otzi was murdered. A flint arrowhead entered his left shoulder, severing a major artery. He would have bled to death within minutes. But before that arrow struck, he had already been in a fight. X-rays show a deep cut on his right hand, a defensive wound. DNA analysis of his equipment reveals blood from 4 different people. 2 on his arrows, 1 on his knife, 1 on his coat. The man had been in a violent confrontation, perhaps multiple confrontations, in the hours before his death. And then someone shot him in the back and left him to die in the high mountains, where the snow covered his body, and the glacier swallowed him whole for 53 centuries. But the glacier didn't just freeze him. Normal freezing would not have preserved his DNA. If you freeze a body, ice crystals form inside the cells, rupturing the membranes, destroying the delicate double helix. What happened to Otzi was stranger, and far more specific. The glacier that entombed him didn't remain frozen solid for 5,000 years. It went through cycles of partial thawing and refreezing, like a massive natural freeze dryer. The moisture sublimated out of his tissues slowly over millennia, leaving behind a desiccated body frozen in place, his cells intact in a way they never should have been. His skin became leather. His organs shrank but didn't rot, and his DNA, the fragile instruction manual of his entire biology, remained in fragments large enough to rebuild from scratch. In 2012, a team led by Andreas Keller published Otzi's complete genome in Nature Communications, and what that genome revealed was stunning. Blood type O, lactose intolerant, which makes sense because Europeans hadn't yet evolved the gene for adult milk digestion. Brown eyes, a genetic predisposition to cardiovascular disease, even though this man lived in an era when heart attacks didn't kill people because they died of other things first. His Y chromosome belongs to haplogroup G2A, a lineage that entered Europe with the first farmers from Anatolia. His maternal line, K1F, is much rarer, found almost nowhere in modern populations. Otzi was a genetic snapshot of a Europe in transition, a moment when hunter-gatherers and early farmers were still mixing. But the most startling genetic discovery wasn't Otzi's own DNA. It was the DNA of the bacteria living inside him. When scientists sequenced the Helicobacter pylori in his stomach, the bacteria that causes ulcers and has lived in human guts for at least 100,000 years, they found something remarkable. Modern Europeans carry a hybrid strain, a mix of African and Asian lineages that merged when populations migrated. Otzi's strain was almost purely Asian. This means that the major mixing event that created the modern European stomach biome hadn't happened yet. Otzi lived in a world before that migration. His gut was a time capsule of a bacterial landscape that no longer exists anywhere on Earth. And then there are his tattoos. 61 tattoos in 19 groups, lines and crosses on his lower back, knees, ankles, and wrists. These are the oldest known tattoos on any human body. But they're not decorative. They're located exactly where X-rays show he had arthritis and joint degeneration. The tattoos correspond to acupuncture points. The marks were therapeutic. Someone in 3300 BC was treating this man's back pain by cutting patterns into his skin and rubbing charcoal into the wounds. Medicine, frozen in ice, waiting for us to understand it. His last meal tells the final story. Analysis of his stomach contents, done decades after his discovery because the stomach had shifted position and scientists initially missed it, revealed ibex meat, einkorn wheat, and a surprising addition, bracken fern. Bracken fern is toxic. It causes cancer and internal bleeding. Ötzi was apparently eating it deliberately, perhaps trying to treat his intestinal parasites. Even in his final hours, this man was self-medicating, treating one condition with something that would cause another. He died fighting, fleeing, covered in the blood of multiple people, with a full stomach and medicine in his gut, and an arrow in his back that no one ever pulled out. The leather of his clothing, his copper axe, his grass cloak, his birch bark containers, all of it was preserved alongside him. In a climate where organic material normally vanishes within decades, an entire 5,000-year-old life emerged from the ice intact, and scientists are still learning from him. Every decade brings a new technique, a new extraction, a new revelation. The glacier that killed him also made him immortal. Now let's leave the mountains and travel north. Denmark, 1950. A family is cutting peat for fuel in a bog near the village of Tollund. Peat cutting is slow, rhythmic work, slicing into the dark, wet earth, pulling up bricks of compressed ancient moss. And then one of them hits something. Not a root, not a stone. It's soft, it's a human face. The police are called because, at first, everyone assumes this is a recent murder. The body of a man buried in the bog, perhaps a local who disappeared months ago. But when they brush away the peat, the face they see is not months old. It's not decades old. The Tollund Man, as he would become known, died around 400 BC. That's 24 centuries ago. That's older than the rise of Rome. That older than Alexander the Great. And he looks like he died yesterday. What you need to understand is how impossible this is. Soft tissue, skin, eyes, hair, internal organs, is the most fragile biological material on Earth. When a person dies, bacteria in their gut immediately begin consuming them from the inside. Within days, the body bloats and discolors. Within weeks, soft tissue liquefies. Within months, there's nothing left but bone. Even in ideal conditions, a body is reduced to a skeleton within a few years. The Tollund Man has lips, his eyelids are closed peacefully, his nose still holds its shape. The stubble on his chin is visible. When you look at photographs of him, you don't see an ancient corpse. You see a sleeping man. A sleeping man who was ritually killed before Athens existed, before democracy, before philosophy, before the entire intellectual foundation of the Western world. How? How did a bog in Denmark outlast everything humans have ever built? The answer is sphagnum moss. This is the plant that forms peat bogs, and it doesn't just grow in water. It creates an environment that is actively hostile to life, a kind of natural embalming chamber. Sphagnum moss absorbs calcium and magnesium from the water and releases hydrogen ions in their place, driving the pH down to levels comparable to vinegar. The water in a sphagnum bog has a pH of about 3.5. That's acidic enough to pickle a body. The bacteria that normally consume dead tissue cannot function in this environment. Their enzymes denature. Their cell membranes rupture. The decomposition process simply stops. But acidity alone isn't enough. The bog is also anaerobic. The dense, waterlogged peat prevents oxygen from penetrating more than a few centimeters below the surface. Without oxygen, aerobic bacteria can't survive. The few anaerobic bacteria that might survive the acidity find themselves starved of nutrients because the moss doesn't release readily available organic compounds. And as if that weren't enough, sphagnum moss produces a compound called sphagnin, a polysaccharide that binds to proteins and literally tans human skin like leather. It's a natural formaldehyde substitute, cross-linking the collagen in the skin, preserving the structure while dissolving the calcium phosphate of the bones from within. The Tollund Man's skeleton is gone. The acid dissolved it over centuries. What remains is a body of preserved skin, tanned by the bog, shaped around an interior that has been reduced to soft, decalcified remnants. He's a leather sculpture of himself. And his face, the part of him that touched the bog last as he was placed there, is preserved so perfectly that you can count his wrinkles. He was killed by hanging. The rope is still around his neck, a braided leather cord that left a deep furrow in his throat. The forensic examination showed that his death was not a suicide. This was an execution, or more likely, a ritual sacrifice. Iron Age bog bodies across northern Europe share similar patterns. Many were killed, some violently, then placed deliberately in the bogs. Some have their throats cut, some have their skulls smashed, some have both. Archaeologists believe these were offerings. Human lives returned to the wet darkness as a gift to the gods who dwelt in the bogs and marshes that covered so much of the northern landscape. And now, thanks to DNA analysis, we can see inside him in a way that no one could see when he was first discovered. In 2020, a team led by Rasmus Nielsen successfully extracted Tollund Man's genome from his preserved tissues. They found that he carried haplotype H, typical of early European farmers, but with distinct local variations. He was lactose intolerant, like Otzi, because the gene for lactase persistence hadn't yet swept through northern Europe. His eye and hair color were dark, a reminder that the pale skin and light hair we associate with Scandinavia today are relatively recent evolutionary developments. His last meal was a porridge of barley and flaxseed, cooked and eaten hours before his death. And in his intestines, scientists found tapeworm eggs. The man had been eating undercooked food, contaminated water. He was sick, and then someone took him to a bog, put a rope around his neck, and killed him. Other bog bodies tell similar stories of ritualized death. Tollund Man, found in a Danish bog in 1952, had his throat cut so deeply that the wound severed his trachea and esophagus. His fingers were preserved well enough that the police took his fingerprints, the oldest fingerprints ever recorded. Windaby girl in Germany, originally thought to be a girl punished for adultery, turned out to be a boy, revealed by DNA analysis just a few years ago. The Cashel Man in Ireland, the oldest European bog body with skin still intact, dates to 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago, making him contemporary with the construction of Stonehenge's later phases. All of them killed, all of them thrown into the acidic, oxygen-free darkness, all of them preserved against every rule of nature. Bog bodies are an ongoing discovery. More than 1,000 have been found across northern Europe, and peat cutters continue to unearth them. Each one is a person from a time before writing, a time when Europe was a continent of scattered villages and ritual sacrifice and gods who demanded human blood. They should have rotted into nothing. Instead, the bogs refused to let them go. And now we go deeper. Deeper in time than should be possible. Deeper than any DNA should have survived. We go to Spain, to the Atapuerca Mountains, to a place called Sima de los Huesos. The name means pit of bones, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Deep inside a limestone cave system, there is a vertical shaft. It drops 43 feet straight down into darkness. At the bottom of this shaft, in a small chamber never reached by sunlight, archaeologists found the remains of at least 28 individual humans. They were not buried there. They were dropped, thrown. The bodies accumulated at the bottom of the shaft over what appears to be many generations. A deliberate deposition of the dead in a place so inaccessible that no one who threw a body down would ever see it again. And the age of these remains? 430,000 years. Let that number settle into your mind for a moment. 430,000 years. That's not the Paleolithic. That's the Middle Pleistocene. That's a time when modern Homo sapiens did not exist. Our species, the one reading this and the one speaking it, would not evolve for another 100,000 years at least. The bodies in the pit of bones belong to an earlier population, a group that genetic analysis would reveal as ancestral to the Neanderthals, a proto-Neanderthal population living in Europe when ice ages came and went, and the world was full of animals that no longer exist. How long should DNA last? There's a formula for that. Scientists led by Logan Kistler calculated that in average bone at average temperature, the half-life of DNA is about 521 years. That means after 5 centuries, half the bonds in the DNA molecules have broken. After 1,000 years, 3/4 are broken. After 10,000 years, it's degraded to statistical noise. After 430,000 years, mathematically, there should be nothing left at all. The original estimate suggested that by 6.8 million years, 0 DNA bonds would remain intact. 430,000 isn't 6.8 million, but it's far, far past the point where any meaningful reconstruction should be possible. Only about 1% of the original DNA should be readable, and 1% of a massively fragmented sequence is essentially useless. But the pit of bones isn't average. The cave maintains a constant temperature of about 10 degrees Celsius, year-round, for 500,000 years. It's dark, sealed from sun. It's dry enough to prevent hydrolysis, the chemical process where water molecules snip DNA strands apart. It's oxygen poor enough to slow oxidation to a crawl, and the bones are embedded in a matrix of mud and clay that further sealed them from moisture and microbial action. In 2016, a team led by Matthias Meyer at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology did what shouldn't have been possible. They extracted DNA from a femur found in the pit of bones and sequenced the oldest human nuclear DNA ever recovered. And while the fragments were tiny, while the sequences were incredibly degraded, the computational methods pioneered by Svante Pääbo, who would later win the Nobel Prize for exactly this kind of work, allowed them to stitch the fragments together into a coherent genome, and that genome told a story that changed paleoanthropology. The Sima de los Huesos humans were not Neanderthals, not yet. Their mitochondrial DNA, inherited only from mothers, had been sequenced earlier and showed a surprising affinity to Denisovans, a mysterious archaic human population known only from a few fragments found in a Siberian cave. But the nuclear DNA, the full genome, told a different story. These people were clearly on the lineage that would become Neanderthals. The Denisovan connection was a ghost in the mitochondrial line, a remnant of some ancient mixing event that had long since been diluted out of the main genome. The pit of bones humans were, essentially, early Neanderthals, or perhaps the common ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans before they split, still living in Europe while their future Denisovan cousins migrated east into Asia, where they would eventually encounter modern humans tens of thousands of years later. Think about what that means. 430,000 years ago, a group of humans who were not quite Neanderthals and not quite Denisovans were living in what is now Spain. They had stone tools, they had fire. They had some kind of culture, some kind of belief system that compelled them to carry their dead deep into a cave and drop them into a vertical shaft, generation after generation. And when they did this, they had no writing to record why. They had no monuments to mark their dead. They simply cast them into darkness and walked away. And the cave preserved those bones so perfectly that we, nearly 500,000 years later, can read the genetic code inside them. 430,000 years. When those people died, the Sahara didn't exist. The English Channel was a valley connecting Britain to the continent. Mammoths and straight-tusked elephants and giant deer roamed Europe. There were at least 5 other human species sharing the planet. And in that cave, someone threw a body into a pit, and the pit never gave it back. Not until we came looking. To give you a sense of scale, the Sima de los Huesos DNA is 6 times older than the next oldest sequenced human DNA that existed before it. The previous record holder, a Denisovan individual from Siberia, was roughly 70,000 years old, and that had been considered a miracle of preservation. The pit of bones shattered that record by a factor of 6. It told us that DNA, under the right conditions, can survive far longer than anyone ever predicted. And it told us that our understanding of molecular decay is still incomplete. The researchers who worked on this project have described the experience as surreal. You're holding a piece of bone that was touched by hands 430,000 years ago. Hands that never knew anything about genetics. Hands that belong to a species that no longer exists. And from that bone, you're pulling out an instruction manual, a full genetic code, and reading it. That's not archaeology anymore. That's something closer to time travel. This is the part where I want to bring it back to you. Back to your life. Back to your body, sitting wherever you're sitting right now, watching this. Your body is made of the same stuff as Otzi's body, as the Tollund Man's body, as the people in the pit of bones. DNA, proteins, lipids, water. All of it temporary. All of it borrowed from the same chemical soup. The difference is that their bodies entered environments that refused to let them go. Ice that freeze-dried them. Bogs that tanned them like leather. Caves that sealed them in cool darkness for 500,000 years. Extreme luck, extreme chemistry, extreme preservation that should not have happened. And those environments gave us a gift. They gave us the ability to reach backward through time and touch our ancestors in a way that no one ever thought possible. We can see Otzi's tattoos and know that someone was trying to ease his joint pain 5,000 years ago, using techniques that we would not formalize for millennia. We can look at Tollund Man's face and wonder what he believed in, what God he thought he was dying for, what words were said over him as the rope tightened around his neck. We can read the genome of the Sima de los Huesos humans and trace the branching paths of human evolution, the splits and mergers and migrations that eventually produced you. Your DNA will not last 430,000 years. Everything you are, every memory, every feeling, every thought, is encoded in molecules that are already breaking down. You will decay. The world will erase you. The bacteria in your gut that keep you alive right now will, one day, begin consuming you. And within a few decades, there will be nothing left of your body but minerals. Within a few centuries, not even your bones. Within a few millennia, your DNA will be so fragmented that no one could ever read it. But these three bodies beat the clock. Against every prediction, against every chemical certainty, they made it. Otzi emerging from a melting glacier, his last meal still in his stomach, his murder still unsolved after 5,000 years. Tollund Man, his sleeping face rising from the peat, a sacrificial victim from a religion whose name we will never know. The people of the pit of bones, 28 individuals thrown into darkness by a proto-Neanderthal community, whose genes still carry the signal of Denisovan lovers and Neanderthal children 500,000 years later. None of them should exist. And yet here they are, telling us who we were. Your DNA will not last 400,000 years. Theirs did. And now we know who they were. If this changed how you think about time, subscribe. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.